So first and foremost, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for taking the time to listening to this amazing webinar that we've got. It couldn't be more timely and useful right now after the whole situation of COVID. Everyone's supply chains around the world, especially here in Australia, have been massively disrupted and profit margins have been eroded, efficiencies have been blown out, forecasting has been blown out. So it's an absolute pleasure to have two industry experts, both from active supply chains, joining us to host this important webinar on rethinking your supply chain. So firstly, we've got Craig Sanford, who's one of the directors for active supply chains. Craig's got over 20 years experience in the industry across a whole range of different industry sectors, and he's had expertise in 3PLs and managed logistics services. Joining him as well is the other director of active supply chains, Matt O'Callaghan. He's also been in the industry for about 25 plus years across 4PL, managed services, and a diverse range of industry sectors as well. So we've got a whole range of diverse participants who are registered for the webinar, and I'm sure there'll be some great Q&A at the end. On that note, a bit of housekeeping. In the interest of time, we asked that we'll open up a Q&A session about halfway through. We've got a roadmap planned out. We'll make sure that we're finished within the hour for any of you who have to drop off. But essentially, we're going to do a presentation, and we're going to invite you all to participate with some interactive Q&A, and I'll moderate that for the host, and we'll get back to you on all those questions. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Craig and Matt in the studio, and they'll take you through the presentations. Thanks again for joining us. I'm your host, Lawrence. If there's any questions, use the chat feature, send across a chat, Q&A. I'll open that moderation up as we need to. So again, over to you, Craig and Matt.
Cheers, Lawrence. Thanks for that, and welcome to everybody. So we'll jump right into some prepared material. And as Lawrence said, we'll look to make it interactive. So if you've got some questions or some clarifications, write them down. And then as soon as we're probably about 10, 15 minutes in, we should be able to answer them for you. And I'm just driving, so just bear with me a second, because there it is. Okay. Okay, so today we're talking about rethinking your supply chain, focus on reducing costs and increasing efficiencies. Another thing that we'd say, involved with a lot of our customers as we are, is also about increasing customer service, because what we've seen during really many years now and accelerated through COVID is just the high touch that comes with a lot of industries, especially e-commerce. And, you know, if you can increase your touch factor for your client to the end customer, that also increases their stickiness with their customer base as well. So we'll just touch on active supply chains for those of you who don't know what Matt and I do. So we run both managed logistics services, often called 4PL, and we also run supply chain consulting services for a number of high-end clients. So some of our clients, for example, are Ford Australia, Mitsubishi Australia, Tico, who import Ram, Maserati, and we also do managed logistics for sleeping duck mattresses. And most people here in Melbourne, that's on pretty high rotation on the advertising at the moment. Supply chain consulting, we've done a lot of consulting for some high-end Australian and overseas brands, including companies like Goodyear, Toyo, Olex, Nexans, people like that. So that's what we do in a nutshell. And I think for today, we're going to take you through a few things that we do when we're in a consulting mode, just rethinking other people's supply chains, but that's validated in our everyday world, because in every one of our managed logistics clients, we're looking to improve their efficiency all the time. And that's what we see as makes the difference. So we treat a lot of our operating customers as if they're consulting customers, and we do that part of everyday life. So a lot of what we'll talk to you about today, or when we answer your Q&A, is based not just on some consulting type approach, but also what we do every day as we manage operations right around Australia. So you'll see up there on the screen, we design, integrate and engage, and we're really focused on helping our customers with their competitive advantage. We're judged by our results. So if you see an error or a problem with any of these PowerPoints, that's because I'm not a skilled PowerPoint creator, but we're judged on creating results for our customers, and that's how we get referrals and word of mouth, which is where most of our business comes from. We work in your business, so you can work on your business. So we take that pretty seriously. When people engage us for consulting or to run their business, often they're doing it because they need a hand or they want to focus on what it is they do. A bit like Sleeping Duck, they make great mattresses and sell them online. And so we consulted to them first, and then we've helped them roll out a national network.
And I think, can I just interrupt for a sec, Craig? I think that's a really important point there, that particularly for me, coming from a consulting background into a managed logistics solution or 4PL, where you actually get into the business and get to understand it and really understand it at a very detailed level, so that you can come up with better solutions and better network designs, rather than coming in and pinch hitting typically that you see from other sorts of consultants. So we are actually getting deeply into your business to understand it, not doing a helicopter look and assessment of data.
Yeah, and certainly we take pride on being on the ground. So we any consulting gig we do, or engagement, probably not a gig, we make sure we're on the ground. So if that operation is operating at 4 a.m. in the morning, we're there with our team watching that operation at 4 in the morning, because you see a lot, not just from data and not just from theory, which is what a lot of consultants do, but you see a lot when people are actually doing the task. And a lot of the people doing the task know a lot more than people think they know. A lot of people on the floor have a really good idea what's good and bad in the supply chain, have excellent ideas, as do truck drivers, customers, and a few other things which we'll get into as we go along. Yep, and I think that's probably the last point up in front of you. Our solutions work because we listen, we remain current, and we do that really because we're negotiating with carriers and providers and warehouse companies all the time for our own business. And we treat your supply chain as if it's our own, and we treat your customers as if they're our customers, because all we've got is service. So that's how we go about it.
So just a bit of background on the 4PL model and how it evolved and what sort of formats it looks like today. So you see there on the right hand side the evolution of the service provider model, if you like, from a 1PL, which is essentially an internal logistics service within your organisation, to a 2PL where you're looking to outsource to carriers on a fairly high level, down to 3PL that you're all aware of. 3PLs are typically very big. They've got national services. They're fairly regimented in you come into their business and figure out a way within the confines and constraints of how they operate. To 4PL logistics providers and consultants sort of thing, where you're designing the solutions, but then you've got your neck on the chopping block to actually implement it and then to run it. And I think it's quite a difference between that 3PL, 4PL paradigm. We're typically looking at not just costs are obviously very important and reducing those costs, but also higher service levels. And we've certainly got a number of clients that we hang our hat on, that we've increased their service levels significantly since coming in to work with them. We typically deliver results through engaging the right carriers on the right commercial terms. Very important that you get the commercial terms right. And you'll see there on the bottom right hand corner, just typically where we see savings coming from. And the commercial terms are roughly about 20% of savings that we see in clients that we work for. So very important to get it right. The hands-on and day-to-day management is also critical. We've got that at about 35% of total savings. And that's where you're actually seeing things that happen on the ground every day that you say, no, that doesn't look right. How can we change that around to do it more efficiently? Through to then the analysis and managing the carrier. We typically see about 20% of the savings there. So that's your typical data analysis. What are our productivities? What efficiencies are we getting out of different transport modes? Can we change transport modes? And then can we manage the carrier better to not let carriers get into a lazy mindset with the contract? And then there's the overall procurement, typically at around 25% of the savings gain. So that's broadly the four key areas that we focus on with our clients.
So when we look to rethink your supply chain, and indeed our own supply chains that we manage, it's very important, and you'll see at the top and the bottom there in red, to have critical thinking. So that's not to be critical, but it's certainly to critically assess what's in front of you, what are the problems, get very clear about what's good and what's average and what's bad in your supply chain. And then down the bottom too, a term I learned many years ago when I was a young engineer, and that's to avoid fog, right? To avoid perception, hearsay, opinion, and guesswork. So it's really just about getting right in, identifying the issues, be open to hearing and seeing those issues. So that's often hard because we've all heard the saying, wood for the trees. We can be like that in our own business sometimes, where you think everything's going all right, but actually there's some fundamental gaps that have opened up over time, or a competitor is doing something a bit different for our client, for one of our competitors of our clients. And then how do we not get too close to what we're doing and be defensive? How do we get really serious about understanding those issues? And then actively listening to criticism, which none of us like, but listening to the criticism and the feedback. And again, something I learned as a young engineer is ask the second question and the third question. Really get in behind what is going on, what are you hearing, why is that occurring, and really extracting that from all stakeholders, including our customers. So, if you're working on your supply chain for your boss or your GM or your CEO, really listen to what it is that they think the problem is, and then ask the second and third question to get to, understand more about it. The second thing to do, point 2 there, is to quantify the issues and keep digging. So look for customer impacts and what the risks are around those. Certainly, in a B2B world, business to business world, for example, a 96% delivery on time in full is pretty good. Most people will be happy with that. In a B2C e-commerce environment, it's total rubbish. So you've got to actually change your mindset about what good looks like sometimes, depending on the customer that you're dealing with. Look for commercial impacts and risks. So, what commercial things, what dollars could be going out the door that you don't quite understand, and what risks go with those. Operational impacts and risks, and compliance. Very big these days, rethink your supply chain. A supply chain needs to be efficient. It needs to deliver what the customer requires, but it also needs to be compliant to the law. And we always want everybody in our supply chain, all of our customers' supply chains, to go home with all the arms, all the limbs they came to work with. They need to be looked after, kept safe, and they need to know that safety is a priority and compliance is a priority as well.
Yeah, and just that last point there on the digging, Craig, I think it's really important to have some patience when you're doing the digging, because it won't always become apparent just where the efficiencies or the savings are. Keep digging, keep looking, because often I like saying to people that the savings are there. They will be there because we intrinsically have a feel for the organisation that the savings are there. So have patience when you're digging.
Yep.
So then we move on to options to rectify. brainstorming and being creative are super important in the exercise in terms of really fleshing out from people who understand the business where the opportunities are. So by all means involve people at all levels inside your business and externals where possible. It might be engaging with carriers, it might be engaging with 3PLs. Get as many perspectives as you can, and then don't be surprised when you're engaging with people on the shop floor, just what sort of benefits you can get out of their understanding of what's happening. I think if you pick and choose the right ones well, you can typically find someone who's got quite a bit of perception on what's not working. And you just need to create an environment with them where they're comfortable openly talking about something that when you might be maybe several levels above them, or they might feel intimidated, just put them in an environment, whether it's standing out on the floor and they can show you things rather than bringing them into a meeting room or a boardroom.
You're just adding to that quickly, even if you're, I've said it done very effectively by one of our consultants, to just go with them. So if they're a picker on the floor, and instead of them telling someone, oh, the gun jams, or, you know, the replen never works, to actually spend an hour on the floor with them, and they can show you the gun and they can show it to you live. That often helps them open up too, and they realize you're a real person and you've got a real interest in them. Again, to one of the points before, if you're going to show up when they start work and you see all their challenges at 4 in the morning, or it might be at midnight, where a lot of managers in the business have never even been there at those times. Again, you buy a lot of credibility with those people that you're serious about understanding what their real problems are and what the opportunities are.
Yeah. The difficulty is if you're outsourcing, for example, your warehouse environment, sure. Getting that understanding from the warehousing providers, because typically they won't want to open up to you with their understanding. And then looking at the expected benefit, start to quantify that benefit early. Just work on some high level numbers, put a few guesstimates into it, but if you can build a size of the prize that you're aiming for through the project, then it just gives you a good target to get to, rather than something that's hasn't got a dollar figure on it, for example. So rough cost models, back of the envelope sort of analysis, have a target there is a really good idea.
Resourcing, starting with your guesstimates from the point Matt was just talking about. Look inside your business for resources, but also get really critical. Just think through how accessible some of those resources might be. Think through the capability of those resources and the attitude for the task. Certainly, you know, our experience is a lot of time that people are rethinking their supply chain. There's someone in the business, and that could be a CFO who's decided that he's getting beaten or she's getting beaten in the market through people who are doing it better. It might be a chief marketing officer or a GM marketing who just can't quite understand why the supply chain won't do what they want it to do to meet the market demand. Yep. So often it's being driven at a relatively senior level, and then you have to look for people when you're looking for resources who are on board with not just doing the same thing and defending that position. And to Matt's point, that can be the case when you outsource often. They often go into defensive mode quite quickly, and there's ways around that, of course. But you need to look for people with the right attitude. So people who are very open as well to understanding, and they understand that the process is not to be critical to smash someone. The process is to find out where the gaps are, where the inefficiencies are, close them, and then that benefits everybody throughout the business. I certainly ask for help, ask for ideas. The old adage that, you know, the only dumb idea is the idea you don't hear. Some ideas you'll hear will be quite outrageous, but you know what? Sometimes there's a small diamond in the middle of that ton of rubbish that you listen to, and that one diamond was worth the exercise. So ask for input from all over the place. You can ask some experts for some free consulting. We do that sometimes. You can ask solution providers because they can often, you know, solution providers might be people who design conveyor systems or robot picking systems. They can often provide a lot of free consulting. So you can certainly access that, but also remember what free means, right? So I won't say what my dad used to say free meant, but the point is that free is free, but often there can be vested interests in that information they give you. So, you know, just be careful the information you're getting and test it yourself. Don't just listen to whatever an expert's sharing with you, whether it be for free or not for free for that matter. Time frame to implement. Be very realistic. That means be conservative. If you're using people internally, people have day jobs and they're not just sitting there waiting for anyone to come along and hand them a 10-week project. So, you know, be realistic about your timeframes and ask for help and advice on big projects. As Matt was saying before, when you're doing a size of the prize, some things look really good to do, but they don't provide a lot of tangible money benefit, or they don't provide tangible service benefit. Some projects provide an incredible amount of benefit, both service and cost, but they take time normally because it's not just the project, it's also a cultural shift for the business, or it can be a cultural shift for service providers that have been part of the business in some cases where we've done consulting for 20 years or more. So remember, the time frame to implement is not going to be as quick as you think, and you just need to be realistic about that time frame.
So just some warnings or watch outs on putting big transformations through your supply chain. First one, many organisations do not necessarily understand the supply chain interconnectedness, and so they won't understand that one supply chain has to be treated one way and another a different way, and you can't necessarily align them without impacting one of them in a significant way. There are some senior managers certainly who we come across who want and expect results, but don't necessarily understand the complexities involved in the supply chain. They look upon it as quite a simple concept of it's boxes and sheds and trucks. But you know, for those of us who've worked in the industry for 25 odd years, we know that there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it than that, and hence the reason why there's you know, good business prospects for us over the journey of 17 or 18 years in Australia. Bring your people on the journey with you. Make them feel part of it. Make them feel some ownership of where you're going. Don't go into the big projects without enough resources, being underclubbed. Make sure you've got the resources. Make sure you've got any investment required. Make sure you've got the technology to do it, because if one of those areas falls down, there's potential the whole project could fall down. So don't underclub it. Think about work on a smaller, quicker to implement project. So we really talk a lot about the quick wins. Bank the quick wins, get some money in the bank from those savings, and use that to fund the next and the next and the next project. It's a much easier way to sell it through the organisation than trying to chase the bigger prize that's probably got a smaller chance of coming off. It's a bigger risk area. So get the quick wins, put the money in the bank, and then start building on it from there.
And success breeds success. So once your organisation starts to see, even if it's little wins, even if the people on the floor see that, you know, they can do a job that used to take them an hour, they can now do it in 20 minutes. Those sort of things just help people buy into the project, and they buy into the fact it's not just a corporate project that they've seen 20 of. They're actually buying into the fact it makes their life better, as well as the business and the customer's life better. Yep.
Okay.
And enjoy the challenge.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. And enjoy the challenge is the last point there. You know, these things are actually fun. Sometimes, you know, when you're getting up at 2 in the morning to see an operation at 3, that doesn't feel like fun. But enjoy the challenge, enjoy the changes you can make, and enjoy the fact you can bring people on a journey. Enjoy the fact that, you know, there can be some people in the supply chain whose lives are quite difficult. They're not getting a lot of fun or excitement. It's the same thing they've always done. And as you transform a supply chain, there can be little wins, as we said before, with people on the floor. There can be people in marketing who all of a sudden think they've got, you know, a new way to go to market, or they can source something cheaper from overseas because you've learned a new way to do that and you've developed it. It can be, you know, your boss is excited because all of a sudden they're seeing something and it's transforming and streamlining their supply chain. And again, you know, the point at the bottom is these are very useful and very transferable skills. A lot of people do not understand the complexity in the supply chain. I used to be an engineer and I didn't understand the complexities in some of this stuff, but it's also enjoyable complexity because a lot of it is simple complex, as in it's a lot of complexity around how it hangs together, but a lot of the answers are actually quite simple. Yeah.
Should we throw to Lawrence and see if there's any questions?
Sure.
Come through.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's great presentation so far, some really valuable points, and haven't got direct questions. What one of the ones that came through actually I've got on email was, what are the differences now with the growth in e-commerce? So what have you noticed? Many supply chains weren't prepared for the massive influx of e-com because of the lockdown. So that was a question that came through on email. I would like to remind the participants that if you would like to have a question to Matt and Craig, definitely send me a chat and I can open up an audio for you, have a direct conversation and maybe provide a case study or your own personal situation that you want to throw. As long as it doesn't go too long, you can have it'll be great to have some interaction there. If it's something that takes more time, I'm sure the guys will be happy to talk to you offline after the event. But yeah, maybe I'll just ask that first question on email, the differences between supply chain readiness for, let's say, before COVID and now with the e-com growth.
Yeah, I think most people have seen, and certainly I believe that COVID-19 and our response to it has accelerated e-commerce. It's accelerated people's acceptance of it. You know, people who were reticent to use it before, they really didn't have a choice at some point there when we were all locked down. If they wanted something, including food, brought to them, they were going to get online. I know my wife used a bring to home ordering app for the first time, probably in about April, and was delighted to see it actually worked. So certainly, I think there's more acceptance, which is driving e-commerce from a consumer point of view. I think businesses, it depends. Some businesses were very well set up for it and they've now flourished, you know, because they already had their networks, they already had a marketing offer, they had a fulfillment model that works for e-commerce. Because I think what a lot of businesses haven't understood is that the consumer really is very demanding. So, you know, the idea that you can get an order today, pick it tomorrow and dispatch it the day after, which is often the case in when you're fulfilling big box retail, that just isn't the case in e-commerce. Certainly, you know, one of our customers, you can order today at 11 and we will have it on a vehicle by 12 and you will have it that afternoon. So a lot of businesses haven't been set up to do that. So they've quickly put in systems, or they're still struggling to do that, but they're trying. And so to fulfill the needs of the e-commerce market.
I think the studies out of the States have shown that e-commerce has, screen's gone, e-commerce has pushed ahead by about 5 years, I think I've read, and also that the logistics providers aren't necessarily geared up to be delivering, because it's quite a different environment where you've got multiple picks going to multiple destinations, whereas they're potentially previously delivering in pallet loads or half pallet loads or layers. So it's a completely different logistics operation that has to be set up in a relatively quick period of time.
I think that's right. So certainly, you know, we've done a bit of work before in the wine industry, and certainly the wine industry has been used to really supplying big box for a long period of time. And then as some of them have transitioned and they're looking to move to an e-commerce, and people can order mixed dozens and things like that, the idea that that can be done in the same work environment as a big box pick and pack operation fulfillment wise is in my view, folly. So a lot of businesses have just had to quickly learn how to set up new e-fulfillment type centres and parts of the warehouse and segment it, different workforces, different training, and certainly to Matt's point too around transport and delivery. That's been put under a lot of pressure here in Australia. So there won't be a lot of transport companies who aren't quite busy right now. It's actually soaked up a lot of excess capacity. And probably what we're seeing at the moment is some organisations, one who I won't name, have really struggled with the volume. They're taking on a lot of business without necessarily putting it through, their normal filters. And so I think we're just going to see that acceleration will then, as we come out the other end, people will fine tune it and the offer will have accelerated between 3 and 5 years.
Craig, I've just got and Matt, I've got a question from Krishna who sent through, in the latest budget, there is a section on grants for supply chain efficiencies. Can you please elaborate if you know of these? Best regards, Krishna. So I'm not sure, it's only sort of less than 24 hours old, the budget. I'm not sure how across you are on this, but...
Yeah, I haven't heard actually how, I'm not too sure whether anything would have been put in place yet in terms of how you apply for those grants. But certainly happy to do some research and find out if someone needs to know. But I think that certainly there's a lot of money going into both the manufacturing industry, the specialised high value manufacturing industry, and into the supply chain, because the other part of the growth of e-commerce is that the warehousing requirements, the footprint of warehouses is actually much bigger. So the government's putting money into the supply chain industry to help investment in logistics in warehousing.
Yeah,
sure.
I haven't either, to be honest, Lawrence and Christian, but certainly what we're excited about is the idea that we can bring on people through, and get them to do a Cert 3 in logistics. And so we can actually give through the federal budget, we're looking, and we're talking to some of our consulting customers about taking that opportunity while you can, bring on some fresh blood. They're like an apprentice. So, we won't expect them to be fully productive and everything quickly, but the idea that the government can support us and support them and bring people into a career that, is very rewarding and certainly is growing and, will be very different in 5 years' time than it is now. And I think the manufacturing push too, I think a lot of people who can understand the value and the risk of having it locally versus overseas and balancing that, I think the businesses that are successful in the future will probably have a multi-sourcing model, some in Australia and some from not just China, but different parts of the growing economy around the world. So,
yeah, and I think that one of the other benefits of that is that the focus of the government is on high-end manufacturing. Yeah. So that means that there'll be very high-value jobs going into those manufacturing organisations. We're not talking about manufacturing cheap product, which really suits the Australian environment. Well educated, lots of experience, very capable, going into these high level jobs.
Yeah, I've got 2 other questions that came through, guys. So another one around inventory and forecasting. With the forecasting done on historical reasons only, with a whole new paradigm now with disruptions and the new norm, as they call it, what advice would you give for better inventory forecasting?
Yeah, it's always been a trick because it has been seen a bit of a black art, how you forecast inventory. Certainly the old doing it off last year's forecast should have gone out in the 80s at some point, because we've had a few shocks since then. And what I would encourage people to do is to get very serious about investigating. So there are some very good data tools now. The fact that you can actually take feeds straight out of point of sale devices, you can take feeds out of your dispatch system. So if you're running a warehouse and you know what SKUs you are dispatching, which you should, they can go straight into the forecasting tool. Those forecasting tools are not worth millions of dollars anymore either. Not everybody has to go and buy the SAP module to do it. There are some very, very good modules that have been rolled out by some very leading companies. I won't mention one, but I couldn't believe it a couple of years ago when they implemented something, but their difference in their inventory and pre-positioning it and getting it right and be responsive to the change in demand has been, you know, off the scales. So there's a lot out there. I won't mention a few that we recommend because that wouldn't be really fair on everybody else. But there are some very, very good tools out there right now that people should get very interested in. And if they need to, get a little bit of advice about how they integrate.
Great.
Bearing in mind that we are in a pandemic, and Craig and I are living in Melbourne, so the government's having a hard time forecasting our number of cases every day. So it's an inexact science, isn't it?
Yeah. Wanted to ask about, sorry, just another question. There's two questions now. I'll just ask, Imtam's just asked a question. There's a lot of talk about data and data analytics. How can businesses turn data into meaningful information so that they can reduce costs and improve their overall supply chains?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think there's lots of tools to do that. And again, I've been very excited since I've left the corporate world that a lot of those tools have become a lot more accessible in the last 8-10 years. And certainly in our own business, we use Microsoft BI. So I am advertising Microsoft BI because we use it. And we've just found that using tools like that to simplify data into something that a manager or a general manager or an ops supervisor can actually look at every day, every month, every quarter. We use that internally, and we're now providing that data with some of our own and our clients' data that they feed us back to them. And that data and analytics power in something like a Microsoft BI, which I don't know what the license costs us, but it's certainly not enough for me to have noticed it. Very powerful tools, really in the palm of your hand, and you know, clever graduates are able to do that. I'm not able to do it, but you know, certainly people who are on the webinars today, they'd certainly have the skills to do it. And I've been stunned at how clever some of those tools are, and they're live data for us too. So you know, I can see what happened yesterday in our businesses because it's all just feeding up into this live data set.
And so it's data not just for us, but it's data that's then available for our client as well. So they can also see what's happening in it. And it just increases the transparency on what's happening tenfold.
Yeah, so and certainly, you know, because it's a very broad question, so I'm not trying to, you know, broad brush it either, but certainly before I came here, we've managed to get one of our managed clients now into the BI environment because we had some problems with our IT systems, which would surprise everybody. But we managed to get that in there, and I was going through it with one of our solutions guys today, and you can quickly see some areas that we will now work on over the next month to see if we can improve the service and to see if we can create some efficiencies out of that. And it was just visible to me because the data was in a way that we could readily understand it. And I think that's the other thing. Don't create something and leave it. Find and invest in people who can drive the tools, change the tools, get a couple of people in your business or you who can actually drive it, and then treat it as a real skill you keep polishing so that you can see trends on trends on trends.
Craig and Matt, another question that came through is, as 4PLs, do you recommend companies to reassess and reevaluate their service provider contracts as part of remodeling their supply chain?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a constant evolution of service provider contracts. You can always do better. You can always look for someone better. You can always look for someone that's more aligned with your organisation. So it's certainly not something that gets cast in stone and put away for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and certainly our experience is the more flexible those contracts are, and the more they are a correct fit for the type of business that you are engaging and the type of services you're engaging, the better off you'll be over the long term. A lot of our consulting clients, we go in early, they've got very strong procurement driven or legal driven contracts. If they then think that through and they take a little bit of advice, we're sometimes called back 2 to 3 years later once they've got a different relationship with their carriers, and we're a lot more effective at that point because we've got more levers. And I think that's what we've noticed. A lot of contracts, they're just too rigid to actually give you, who's the one who's paying for the service, the right amount of leverage.
Yep. Craig, I want to ask a follow-up question for that because I made some notes earlier. So you mentioned the difference in KPIs between B2B supply chains and B2C supply chains. 96%, would be a good result, as you mentioned, for B2B. As companies now, are moving forcibly into a B2C environment, and they probably weren't prepared for that. Just following up from my perspective, what you both just answered there, have you seen a growth in service level agreements over and above just contracts and a shift of that with companies?
Yeah, certainly we do believe in service level agreements, and we've engaged with that for a long time. And I think that often the difference too with a B2C type customer is often they can be less rigid, they're less corporate, they're more end result focused, and they often want to insert things, as we've just done with one of our contracts, with a star rating. Okay, so a star rating is the customer giving them a star rating, and we are a part of that star rating. So it might just not be fulfillment and delivery related. It might be what's your overall feeling about how your experience with us. So what we're finding is, and we saw it in a major who went to market about 3 years ago where we did some consulting too. They were asking their providers to buy into and have money at risk over a star rating, which is 1 rating. Okay, and so I think that's quite different. It's quite confronting to a lot of traditional 3PLs too, because they can't control all the levers. But that is the new environment in B2C. We are part of the service. It's not just cost, it's not just service, it's also about whether when we're there, how we treat them, what the attitude is, how quickly we respond. It's a different world when you're dealing with every consumer has a voice.
Yeah, I think there's quite a difference in B2C typically is what's the experience of the end consumer, whereas B2B, if you're delivering late to a business customer, there's a cost impact. So it might be in the automotive world, you deliver parts to a dealer who's then sending it out to their network. If the parts are getting into that dealer late and their truck has to go out late and doesn't meet the next level service, the car's got to stay in the yard for an extra day. There's a cost impact and there's an impact on the customer.
A couple of other questions coming through, guys. So from Elsa, are you able to also help businesses export and expand into international markets? In what areas would you be able to assist your clients? In which countries and regions do you have more strengths? That's for Elsa.
Okay, well, actually, Elsa, that isn't something we're super strong on, but we would put you in touch with another organisation who might be a little bit like Australian Trade and Logistics. We'd put you in touch with them if it was us. And again, we can help around certain aspects of that, about how you pack and some of those sort of things, but that probably isn't really our strength.
Great. Another question from Taz. What has been the effect of modern slavery laws since first implementation? How much will it impact supply chains in the future?
Yeah, I think that's an evolving space. Certainly, if you're in Victoria, it's a little bit topical at the moment with some procurement discussions that are going on at government level, and I think the impact again has probably been delayed through the pandemic, because a lot of people have had other things on their mind and other issues, and certainly a lot of businesses and a lot of business people, had their lives smashed, put on hold, etc. But I think that will come back, and we're certainly seeing the US being a lot stronger as they find concerns and issues with modern slavery and with product authenticity. So I think that will accelerate. And I was actually speaking to a colleague of mine 2 days ago, even talking about in the produce supply chain in Australia, just how, some of these tools and some of these views of what is a fair wage, a piece rate if you can't make a fair day's wage out of it. How does all that impact on Australia and what we want to be and what we want to stand for, and how we'll be deploying probably some of the similar tools that you'd use to audit overseas factories and overseas suppliers, might be able to deploy those in Australia. And I think there's some good work there being done by Ethical Trade Alliance as well. And, you know, so we think that will become much more serious. And certainly we're giving advice to a couple of our customers who import from overseas, just about getting on the front foot with that. You don't want to be caught with something in your supply chain being smelly and it all of a sudden destroying your brand. So.
Right. Thanks, guys. Quick other question from Mariel. Hope this will be answered. It's what are the best strategies in distribution during a pandemic? So are there any sort of specific tips about improving distribution, I suppose?
Well, I suppose there's a number of slides coming up where we start to delve into that and narrow that question down into specific areas. Certainly, broadly speaking, I'd be saying you can do some simple things like look at your modes of transport to get some better efficiencies and lower your cost, particularly during times when volumes are possibly down from their normal level.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is probably self-evident as we watched Australia close its borders, the idea that you have inventory closer to your customer, you know, so that makes your final mile or your distribution easier, quicker, etc. Because certainly there were some delays as some borders closed. You know, we had a lot of product delayed as WA's border closed, for example, and some issues going across the Queensland border for a little bit of period there where no one was quite sure what was happening. I think the other thing I'd say, back to one of Matt's points about commercials before, a lot of people have all their eggs in one basket because they've got a contract or they got a great deal for handing over the entire contract, or they've worked with these people for 10 years, or whatever the reason. Certainly, the more relationships you have, the more flexible your commercials, the clearer you are with your carriers and entertaining other carriers. So I'm not saying being a flirt with any carrier that walks past your door, but certainly being only dedicated to one. We're watching a number of people we've done consulting work with in the past really struggling with that. They got a great procurement deal when the times were good. It ain't working for them right now because the networks are bulging and they don't have any natural mechanism in a pandemic to switch to carrier B, who they have a relationship with. They're not integrated. They don't know how they work. It's hard to actually induct a new one during a pandemic. So yeah, I think people have learned a little bit more about flexibility, I think. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, we haven't got any specific questions coming through now. I think that, do you want to cover off anything you mentioned, Matt, or do you want me to open up again to the panel?
If there's more questions coming through, happy to do them. Or
okay. Well, we've got, yeah, the chat session is just still open.
That's all right. I think, you know, from our point of view, because we do have a number of slides, but Lawrence will share those with people that ask for them.
Yep.
I think the main thing, as I was saying before, is I came to this as an engineer, you know, and I'm certainly surrounded in the industry by lots of people who are very smart with supply chain degrees and, you know, master's degrees in import, export, etc. I think the main thing to do when you're trying to transform your supply chain is take in lots of information from lots of people. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it all. And then just remember that whilst it is complicated because of the way all the parts hang together, it's often very simple because we have people doing processes, right? So most of the time you can find efficiencies by watching a process, understanding the process, drawing it out, mapping it, and looking for where it doesn't make sense because two people have touched it. Or, you know, for example, in automotive, where we do a lot of, is it better to have wrapped that windscreen and taken an extra 10 minutes to wrap it and put it in something that will stop it breaking? Or is it better to put it in a network and have it break 3 times? Well, clearly the answer is it's more supply chain sensible to take the windscreen, understand the network it's going through, like a, you know, a parcel network, understand what happens in that network, secure it properly, and then it goes through undamaged, or decide that I'm not going to put it through that parcel network. I'm going to hand carry that and wear that cost. And once you can explain that to the customer too, those are very simple examples of most companies we deal with would rather deal with the windscreen once, even at an extra cost, than the whole cycle of sending it, it's broken, the dealer's upset, the customer's more than upset, it comes back, there's a returns process, blah, blah, blah. So trying to get those efficiencies are often just sensible.
Great.
I'm quite big on telling our people who are on the floor that if they see something that's not right, to stop, better to stop and be conservative and redo it, or repack it, or put more packaging on, or fix some packaging, than just let it go through the network. It's a big thing. Err on the side of caution than letting something go out that you know is going to get damaged.
Yeah, and a simple rule of thumb that most people know is, to return a product costs 7 times as much as to send the product. Wow. So, if you have to spend a little bit more money sending it once, sometimes that's the right answer. Most of the time, that is the right answer, unless you're sending a widget or something like that. So
it's probably related to what we've just been discussing. So Christian's just sent a question through. Guys, with the pandemic destroying the just-in-time concept, would it be time again to relook at inventory? Any comments?
Yeah. I mean, destroying, I think, might be a touch strong. I think it's certainly challenged the just-in-time concept, because certainly we've seen not just delays out of different ports. We've not just seen, again, on our auto sector, the factories and the warehouses in Thailand certainly went through a period where they weren't doing anything. And so, parts for certain very high-selling utilities in this country just weren't coming in for a while. So we've certainly seen the challenges to that. And I think that's, again, a question around understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, understanding now that we've all seen it, the impacts of being single point sensitive, with example parts coming out of Thailand, and then working through where you carry parts and what are your other options to get critical parts into the country. And we were discussing it the other night that with the Sydney port going through what it went through recently, and now there's a backlog and medical containers are being prioritised, which is appropriate. Can we divert some of our containers into Perth and use some backhaul volume and at least get them in the country and then backhaul them back into Australia? Is that a reasonable risk mitigation strategy? But again, that's all about resetting your inventory. And again, the better the tools are and the more you're focused on it and the more real it is to your business, the further you'll get down that pathway. Yeah.
It's a very interesting question, because do you redesign your supply chain so you've got more inventory in the country now whilst we're going through a pandemic, only to maybe get a vaccine next year sometime, and then that redesigned supply chain becomes too onerous? Then you're holding too much inventory in the country. It's a question that goes beyond logisticians, if you like, because none of us can predict whether or not there's going to be a vaccine.
Sure. Thanks, guys. 2 quick other questions coming through. So one is, what will be some of the in-demand skills for logistics and supply chain roles moving into the future that employers will want to see in candidates? And then I'll ask another question around sustainability in supply chains, but maybe if we can answer the in-demand skills for logistics and supply chain roles in the future.
Yeah, I think certainly when I look around, I think the in-demand skills are actually some of the I think experience, which isn't a skill, but people who are prepared to get real experience in the supply chain, actually picking on the floor, driving a courier van, doing a stock take, dispatching, being there in the cool room, in the middle of winter, and actually doing those hard yards for a period of time. I think that experience, a bit like working at Macca's, I think employees really value that, because they're real and they understand a number's a number, but a number in the supply chain is often, a guesstimate, because what actually happens is what people do or how processes are set up. So I think experience will be very, very powerful, and I've always thought it is. I think other skills are going to be, and again, maybe it's a life skill, around resilience. You know, I think we've seen in the pandemic a lot of things change, a lot of paradigms be challenged. I think a lot of people, you know, have actually noticed that they're not as resilient and their supply chains aren't as resilient. So I think people who, you know, can think outside the square, have actually got good analytical skills. They don't need to be exceptional, because you can normally find someone who's got exceptional data talent skills, and they can troubleshoot and they can just build relationships with people on the floor, with their boss, with the IT team, with a provider. And so people with those broad range of skills, I think, will be, you know, in demand.
Yep. I think just building on what Craig mentioned, I think if there's recent graduates out there who are coming from a range of disciplines, marketing, engineering, accounting, etc., if they're looking to spend time on the floor, look at doing something like a process mapping project, where it forces you to spend time on the floor, speak to the operators on the floor, gain an understanding of what's happening and why it's happening, and then document it in a process map so that you can look at that and say, well, now I understand what's happening. I can see it on a piece of paper. How can we make this better?
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. You know, I mean, at even a level below that, helping the operators build a standard operating procedure, you know, helping them with a 5S program, you know, which is lean, helping them with their lean boards. And, you know, a lot of graduates, I won't say, you know, a lot of graduates in my experience haven't wanted to do that because it was a bit, you know, uncool. It's very cool. Okay, because you learn exactly what's happening on the floor, and you can bring some of your better PowerPoint skills and Word skills and SharePoint skills to the table, but you're also learning something that's extremely valuable because you know how something really works, not how your boss or someone thinks it works.
Just a quick thanks on that point from Imtiaz. You probably haven't seen that, but he's just saying he's worked on the floor for a long time. It's great to see you've highlighted the importance of it. Thanks for those insights. Just moving on to another question, also from Imtiaz. Any comments on sustainability initiatives and eliminating waste from going into landfills in Australian supply chains?
Oh, that's batting outside my league.
Yeah, that's a little bit outside my league too, but I think his point, I don't know what his point is, but if I'm guessing his point, it's a very good point though, because we're watching non-returnable packaging, which means we're handing that packaging problem to someone in the supply chain because we don't want to deal with that packaging coming back at us. I think the days of that are limited because it's been very convenient to drop that into landfill. But, you know, as we all know, other parts of the world are not wanting to take Australia's rubbish anymore. And we need to be grown-ups about a lot of those topics. And certainly some of the packaging of some of the big players over the years, you know, I worked for Cadbury Schweppes for a while. They were already on some of these packaging covenants years ago and de-waxing and making their packaging much more suitable for recycling. I think that will get accelerated as we begin to get a little bit more serious about, you know, what it does with all this rubbish going into a landfill. You run out of places to put it. It's really quite ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, just to add my 2 cents to that, Craig and Matt, I think there has been an exponential growth in home deliveries, obviously with lockdowns and especially in the food and bev area. It's been a huge challenge there that companies have really been forced to use so much more single-use plastic, to the point where legislation around Australia in other states, such as New South Wales, South Australia and Western Australia, they were about to implement single-use packaging restrictions, but they've had to delay that because of the pandemic. So I think that, as you say, that's on the food and bev side, but it is definitely going to creep into very quickly into general e-com especially and other parts of the supply chain.
Oh, I definitely think.
Certainly in our house, with the amount of deliveries coming through, there's not a recycle bin big enough for us.
Yeah. Look, I'm just mindful of time. I'd like to just give another shout out to the participants. Feel free to throw some more questions. If you want me to open up an audio line so you can speak to Matt or Craig directly, I can do that as well. But you know, I'm mindful of time because we had allowed an hour allocation just in case participants have got another meeting to attend or maybe some homeschooling to look after at 3:30 in Victoria. So you know, we're quite mindful of that. This presentation will be recorded and we'll be happy to send out a link to that so you can use it back as a resource. Both Matt and Craig have gladly offered their expertise. If you need a one-on-one consultation to talk about your own specific situation in your business, you'd like to get their tips and advice, you know, you could probably pick their brain for a little bit and have a really great discussion with them. So a final shout out to everyone. Just while we're waiting for anyone to send that through.
Thank you from Craig and I too.
Yeah, I was just about to say, before everyone did that, I've got a thanks from Intos, thank you. So just a couple of quick final words from yourself, Matt and Craig. Almost if like your top 3 tips and advice for redesigning your supply chain in 2021. That's a question from me as a parting gift.
Ooh, I'll go first. I'll say the devil's in the detail.
Okay.
Don't forget the detail. Don't gloss over it.
Are we doing it one each? That's what we're doing? Okay.
Oh, we should do 4 then, so it's balanced, yeah.
Yeah, I think be excited about learning. That's what I'd say. Just, you know, again, I did enter it from something else. And, you know, the idea that you can see something, not understand it, but then as you dig into it, it's really quite mind-blowing how clever some things you'll see in the supply chain really are. I mean, I'm stunned all the time about how clever people have been to design some things. And then also just be open to, you know, just wood for the trees type stuff, as I said before. You know, you've got to be able to see the wood, not just see the trees, and see what's really going on. And, you know, just understand whether that is the best you can do. Is it the best the business can do? Is it the best your partners can do? And then think through strategies if you are using a partner to execute part of your supply chain, because it's very common. How do you engage with them in a way that isn't a procurement smash them on the head type approach? It's how do they come to the table with a win that wins for you, and then how does some money flow back to them to incentivize them to do what you all know should be done? Yeah.
Yep. Just one other quick point. I know that you know, I did do closing remarks, but one thing I just sort of thought of as well that's happened recently in the last few days on the news. You know, we've seen companies like Australia Post who's going to be employing people like crazy to fill distribution centres and delivery last mile fulfilment. And it is related to one of the questions that we had come through from the audience around future skills. Do you see a lot of opportunities for transfer? I mean, we've had, especially here in Victoria, there's a whole range of hospitality, tourism, entertainment, all those type of jobs that have been lost. You see a lot of opportunities for reskilling, and you guys both touched on that, the new training and apprenticeship sort of schemes or those incentives. Can you see a large growth in jobs across supply chain Australia?
Yeah, well, I certainly can. I think skills are transferable. I think there are some skills that would take some serious retraining. You know, like we've had a few questions around inventory. A very good inventory manager, someone who can get behind the numbers and, you know, really provide all that value that a really great inventory manager can do. I think that's a skill that, you know, is not simply transferable, but certainly people with an analytical brain and a thirst for numbers and patterns are very transferable. We've certainly recently engaged a different customer service person, not from the industry, but very transferable skills around listening. The customer's always right. Well, they're mostly right, but the customer's always right. Taking it on board, and the responsiveness of, even if we can't answer the question quickly, keeping them engaged. Now that's a very transferable skill from lots of industries. But what I'd say to people who are transferring, before Matt comments, is we're a bit of a brutal industry though, if I'm dead honest. You know, the supply chain has come up through truckers and sheds and, you know, containers and wharfies. And so all I'm getting at is it's a very direct industry, and a lot of people who enter it new take a little while to cope with how, you know, in your face some of the conversations can be, but it's very rewarding. And, you know, it's very diverse, and I definitely think people can transfer in from lots of different industries.
Yeah, look, and certainly in my experience, I've seen people come into the industry with no experience, but they're bright or they're half bright. They've got a passion for it. They've got sound thinking, and they communicate well. And those types of people you can put into a new role in a new industry, and they'll pick it up very quickly.
Absolutely. It's very practical. It's a practical industry in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again, Craig, Matt. I think it's been a really valuable, insightful webinar. We've had some great interaction with the viewers, and I'm sure that, you know, the supply chain is only going to get more complex, more exciting, more rewarding, as you mentioned. And as customers now have had a taste for e-com and a whole range of different fulfillment possibilities, the companies who are serving those customers have to now make sure they're up to scratch to make sure they don't lose customers because of a poor supply chain. So, you know, some great stuff there. I'd love to do another follow-up webinar with you both, maybe around some of those specific last mile strategies, or maybe some inventory strategies, so we can break it down into some more, you know, specific areas of interest across the supply chain.
Yeah, we'd be happy to put up some case studies and work through them with the audience, Lawrence.
Yep.
Great. All right. Thanks again. Appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us today on today's webinar. And as I said, reach out. There's plenty of expertise here that you just heard from. So reach out for your own benefit and have a chat with them. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.